صلاة الجمعة يعني بمدينة الصدر.
In this footage, recorded in March of 2022, an Iraqi journalist interviews a young woman. She's wearing a black abaya. A hijab covers her head. At first glance, she appears to be any other local woman from Baghdad, calm, composed, blending in. But then she speaks.
فحبيت أحضر هاي صلاة الجمعة بالضبط.
And her Arabic is flawless, smooth, confident, natural, not a single trace of a foreign accent. The journalist asks her what she thinks of Muqtada al-Sadr, the influential and controversial Shiite cleric who dominates Iraqi politics. Her answer is immediate. It is clear that he is a patriotic figure who rejects intervention from any country, whether in the West or the East, she says without hesitation. In my opinion, this should be the position of every Iraqi political leader. The journalist nods politely. He has no idea who she really is. No one watching the interview that day could have imagined that this woman was not an Iraqi at all, but an Israeli citizen. And in Iraq, where contact with Israelis is a criminal offense punishable by severe penalties, this secret could cost lives. A year later, her name would explode across headlines around the world. Elizabeth Tsurkov. She vanished in Baghdad in March 2023, kidnapped in broad daylight by Kataib Hezbollah, a powerful Iranian-backed Shiite militia classified as a terrorist group by the United States. No ransom demand, no public statement, just silence. Then, 7 months later, a video surfaced online. In it, the same woman appears. Her face is pale, her voice sounds strained, but her words are chilling. I worked for the Israeli intelligence agency, the Mossad, and the CIA.
לטובת המוסד, בתחילת עבודתי עבדתי בסוריה.
The confession sent shockwaves through the media. Was it real? Or was it forced under duress? Her family says it's a lie. According to them, Elizabeth is not a spy. She is a doctoral student at Princeton University, a human rights advocate, a researcher studying political movements in Iraq. They say she went to Baghdad to conduct fieldwork for her PhD. They say she was abducted and coerced into making a false confession. But if that's true, why was she meeting high-ranking Shiite figures tied to militant groups? Why was she moving freely in regions hostile to Israel? And why did she use her Russian passport to conceal her identity? The mystery of Elizabeth Tsurkov is no longer just a political incident. It has become a full-blown international thriller. Who is she really? A well-meaning student who walked into the wrong place at the wrong time? Or a deep-cover operative who crossed the line one time too many? The truth lies in the shadows, and to find it, we must go back. Back to her childhood in Soviet Russia, for her service in Israeli military intelligence, to her years of navigating war zones in the Arab world, and to the final moment she disappeared from a Baghdad cafe, leaving behind only questions, silence, and a story so unbelievable it could only be true. Her name was Liza, a little girl with dark eyes and a curious gaze, born in November 1986 in a city still called Leningrad. Snow, communal apartments, long queues, and whispered conversations in kitchen corners. This was the world she first knew. Her family was Jewish, politically aware, and shaped by hardship. They supported the well-known dissident Anatoly Sharansky and paid the price: arrests, interrogations, fear. When the Soviet Union began to crumble, a door opened. Israel was welcoming its own. In 1990, the Tsurkov family, with 4-year-old Liza in their arms, boarded a plane and left the Soviet Union behind forever. They were settled in a kibbutz, one of those ideological communes where everything was shared: meals, chores, even child-rearing. Liza was raised not just by her parents, but by an environment steeped in Zionist slogans, military pride, and a firm sense of who belonged and who didn't. There were no Arabs in the kibbutz, not because it was formally forbidden, but because they simply didn't fit the picture. There, surrounded by Israeli flags, Independence Day parades, and stories of fallen heroes, Liza grew up. She was bright, too bright not to ask questions. But for now, there were none. Only one certainty: you are here, therefore, you belong. But at some point, quietly and gradually, she would start to look around. And one day, beyond. Beyond the lines she was taught to honor, protect, and never cross. That's where her double life would begin. But for now, she was just the girl from Leningrad, though with each passing year, more Israeli than Russian, and with each passing year, less of just a girl. In Israel, there's no choice. The army comes for everyone, especially when you turn 18 and grow up on a kibbutz, where serving in the IDF is almost a sacred rite of passage. Elizabeth Tsurkov, a slender girl with a straight posture and serious eyes, puts on the uniform and becomes part of the very system she was raised to admire. She's assigned to military intelligence, not to the front lines, but to quiet, sterile offices where politics is shaped through computers, maps, and intercepted signals. And it's there, among classified files, voice recordings, and mission briefs, that something awakens in her, a fascination with the Arab world. It all began with voices, audio recordings, phrases spoken in a foreign, hostile, yet unexpectedly captivating language. At first, it was just noise. Her first reaction was almost comical. "Me no understand Arabic," she scribbled in her notebook, frustrated and lost. But stubbornness runs in her family. She buys a dictionary and signs up for classes, secretly listens to Al Jazeera, not as the enemy, but as a teacher. Slowly, she begins to understand. Not everything, but enough to hear the nuances: sorrow, anger, prayer. Word by word, she falls in love with the language, and with it, a culture she'd once been taught to fear. She no longer sees Arabs as the other. Instead, she wonders, what do they feel? Why do they fight? What do they dream about? It's the beginning of a journey that will eventually take her far beyond duty or borders. For now, she's still in uniform. But something inside her has changed. She is no longer just a soldier. She is an observer, a seeker, someone who wants to understand, even if it's dangerous. After her military service, Elizabeth seemed to shed her old mask. She took off the uniform and adopted the voice of a human rights advocate. She began working for Israeli NGOs, defending Palestinians, refugees, and victims of torture. She attended court hearings, wrote reports, and criticized the military. On paper, she was just another activist, but her voice kept growing louder. One of her mentors was Natan Sharansky, a former Soviet dissident and political prisoner, later a symbol of human rights in Israel. In Israeli politics, he was a controversial figure, but for Elizabeth, he became a launchpad. She worked as his assistant, participated in negotiations, drafted official statements, and attended international conferences. Behind her activist role, she was building diplomatic and political skills. At the same time, her academic career flourished. She won research grants, studied at Tel Aviv University, completed a master's degree in Chicago, and finally reached Princeton, the pinnacle of academic prestige. There, she focused on Shiaism, religious politics, and Iraq. Her work was serious, well-researched, and written in polished academic language. But the articles she published during this period were anything but neutral. Elizabeth openly criticized the Israeli occupation and military operations. Her writing appeared in the New York Times and in liberal outlets like Plus 972 magazine. Some saw her as a hero, others as a traitor. And then, an unexpected detail. In 2015, she posted a photo taken inside the Pentagon. In the picture, Elizabeth stands behind the official U.S. Department of Defense press podium beneath the Pentagon seal. Her caption reads, "I hereby declare a no-fly zone over Syria." A joke, perhaps, but to others, it looked like something more, a sign of how close she was to Western institutions of power. This added to the growing questions. Why did this human rights activist and former military intelligence officer have access to areas in Baghdad where even seasoned journalists weren't allowed to walk? Why did she move so freely through circles deeply suspicious of outsiders? And how did she gain the trust of people who trust no one? The image began to fracture. An activist, yes, but also a woman shrouded in secrets. With every step, she approached the invisible line that separates idealism from espionage, a line that, once crossed, changes everything. While most Israelis would never dare approach territories hostile to their country, Elizabeth Tsurkov crossed those borders, quite literally, again and again. She appeared in places where an Israeli passport could mean a death sentence, but she always arrived under a different name, with a different document, a different story. Her Russian passport opened doors that were firmly shut to Israeli citizens. In places where the word Mossad could cost someone their life, Tsurkov introduced herself simply, Elizabeth Tsurkova, or Liza Arkady, a Russian researcher, quiet, educated, curious. With that identity, she traveled to Syria, a country officially at war with Israel, to Lebanon, where Israeli agents are hunted even among waiters, to Iraqi Kurdistan, to Mosul, to the Shiite neighborhoods of Baghdad, and even to Najaf, Iraq's religious capital. Places where simply being a foreigner, especially with a Jewish face and accent, could be fatal. She walked the streets in a black abaya. A neatly tied hijab covered her head. She blended in among the women of the East. She spoke fluent Arabic. She answered questions from local journalists. She interviewed religious leaders, and no one ever suspected she was Israeli, because she never said who she really was. Her mission, whatever it may have been, was deeply concealed. Officially, she was conducting academic research, studying Shiite movements, sectarian tensions, and political alliances. But no other Princeton student had ever gone this far. No other researcher had followed such a path or sat across the table from people Israel openly considers its enemies. This wasn't just research, it was immersion into a world where a single wrong word, spoken in the wrong tone, could cost you your life. Spring 2022. On screen, a woman in a black abaya and hijab. She speaks Arabic calmly and confidently, with a slight accent, yet without hesitation. Across from her sits an Iraqi journalist, a microphone, a camera, a few questions. They are discussing Muqtada al-Sadr, the most influential Shia leader in Iraq, a charismatic politician, and a fierce opponent of both American and Israeli influence. Tsurkov, presenting herself as a Russian researcher, speaks evenly. The journalist nods. It never crosses his mind that the woman in front of him is not just a foreigner, but an Israeli citizen. He doesn't know that under Iraqi law, passed just months earlier, any Iraqi suspected of contact with Israelis can be sentenced to death. Now, imagine, you're interviewing a Mossad agent, and you don't even realize it. Tsurkov isn't simply researching the political landscape, she's getting too close. Al-Sadr is a figure at the center of fragile coalitions, sectarian tensions, and regional power struggles. And it is his inner circle that interests her most. She arranges meetings, negotiates through intermediaries, and asks questions no outsider should be asking. No one knows what she's recording, what she's passing along, or what she's truly seeking. This is no longer the work of a researcher. This is dangerous proximity, one step away from people who could sentence her to death with a single word. March 2023. A warm evening in Baghdad. Outside, the sounds of the street, the glow of car lights, the smell of coffee and spices. Inside a small cafe in the Karada district, a woman sits alone, wearing a hijab, quietly checking her phone, occasionally glancing toward the door. She is waiting for someone, a Shia cleric she arranged to meet. Through him, she hoped to establish contact with his cousin, a high-ranking member of Kataib Hezbollah, the powerful Iran-backed militia. But the meeting never happens. At some point, instead of her expected contact, other men enter the cafe. Everything happens quickly, no shouting, no scene, just disappearance. By the end of the day, she is gone. She won't be seen in public again for nearly 7 months. The news will leak to the media only in the summer. Until then, silence. Israel makes no statement. Princeton stays quiet. Her family says nothing. In the first days, no one even knew where she was or if she was alive. Later, Israel will officially state that Kataib Hezbollah was responsible for the abduction. But the group denies involvement. Instead, they claim the woman who vanished in Baghdad was an Israeli intelligence agent and call on Iraqi authorities to uncover an entire spy network. Thus begins one of the most complex and perilous stories in recent years, a tale of either a catastrophic failure or a successful unveiling. 7 long months, and not a single word, no statements, no official confirmations, as if Elizabeth Tsurkov had vanished from existence. Her name, once flashing in the headlines, disappeared just as quickly as she did. No vigils, no press conferences, no public campaigns for her release, just silence. Heavy and suffocating, like a windowless cell. Then, in November 2023, the silence was shattered. A video appeared online. The woman on screen was dressed in black, her face pale, her voice lifeless. It was Elizabeth. She spoke Hebrew, introducing herself and confirming her Israeli citizenship. What followed stunned the world. A confession. She claimed she had worked for Mossad and the CIA. She spoke of building ties between Israel and Syrian opposition groups, of visiting northeast Syria on assignment, and later working in Iraq to encourage political normalization and fuel internal Shia tensions. But perhaps the most shocking were her political declarations. She condemned the Netanyahu government, calling its actions in Gaza foolish, and said they doomed Israel to endless war. She even appealed directly to the families of Israeli hostages in Gaza, urging them to pressure the government. If you want your sons and daughters to stay alive, this war must stop. She ended by pleading with her family, her parents, her siblings, her friends, to act. She had been held for over 7 months, she said, and there was no sign of any effort to secure her release. Her family responded immediately. They insisted the video was staged, that Elizabeth had been forced to speak, that this was not a confession. It was a script, memorized under duress. She's not a spy, they said. She's a scholar, a researcher. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Iraqi analysts agreed. Linguists, journalists, and human rights experts dissected the footage and concluded that the body language, tone, and phrasing all appeared rehearsed, mechanical, possibly recorded under threat, or worse, under torture. And so, after months of darkness, a voice finally broke through. But even that voice risked being lost again, drowned in the noise of political interests, diplomatic games, and global indifference. Her voice was heard, but was anyone truly listening? When Elizabeth's story hit the news, everyone asked the same thing. If she was in Iraq for her PhD, what did Princeton know? Her family and colleagues said it was dissertation fieldwork, and it turns out they were right. In October 2023, a university spokesperson officially confirmed that Elizabeth had been conducting approved doctoral research in Iraq. Several faculty members were aware of her work in Baghdad. Still, Princeton's public stance struck many as strangely muted. The university issued a short message. Elizabeth is a valued member of the Princeton University community. We are deeply concerned for her safety and well-being, and we are eager for her to be able to rejoin her family and resume her studies. To some of Elizabeth's friends, it read more like a polite health update than a response to the abduction of a student in a war zone. There was also the matter of policy. Iraq is listed as a Category X country, one of several places considered too dangerous for university-related travel. Students are generally barred from conducting Princeton-sponsored research there. If Tsurkov had received an exception, it wasn't widely publicized. There was no detailed press briefing, no official defense of her work. And although the university said it had been in regular contact with U.S. officials, the lack of visible support left some feeling that Elizabeth had been quietly abandoned. When Elizabeth Tsurkov's name began appearing in international headlines, concern spread quickly. After all, this was a citizen of Israel and Russia, kidnapped on the territory of a U.S. allied country, and a student at one of America's most prestigious universities. Human rights organizations like Amnesty International, DAWN, and Human Rights Watch were among the first to raise the alarm. They issued urgent calls for her immediate release, condemned the illegality of her detention, and stressed that her alleged confessions under duress had no legal or moral value. In the U.S., the concern reached the highest political levels. Several influential members of Congress sent a letter to President Joe Biden urging decisive intervention. The message was clear. If a dual citizen of Israel and Russia could be kidnapped abroad without consequence, the precedent would be dangerous for everyone. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly blamed Kataib Hezbollah for the abduction. Beyond that, Israel's diplomacy moved into a quieter gear. There were no press briefings or detailed updates, only the assumption that back-channel negotiations might be underway. Amid this diplomatic fog, rumors swirled. Some Middle Eastern sources suggested that Russia, as one of Elizabeth's official homelands, was mediating between Iraq, Iran, and Israel. But no official body ever confirmed such involvement. The international response, although present, felt frustratingly slow to her family and supporters. Public solidarity stood alongside private hesitation, and beneath it all lurked the question no one wanted to ask aloud. What if rescuing Elizabeth came with a political cost? Elizabeth Tsurkov's life is a hall of mirrors, each reflection contradicting the last. On one side stands the activist, years with Israeli and international NGOs, aid to refugees, public campaigns against torture and occupation, op-eds excoriating Tel Aviv's policies. On the other side is the former military intelligence officer she once admitted to being, a woman who slips between passports and languages, introducing herself as the Russian researcher Liza Arkady while concealing her Israeli citizenship. Israel insists there is nothing covert about her. An anonymous official, quoted by the Times of Israel, declared, "She is absolutely not a member of Mossad, period, exclamation point, underline." The official storyline portrays Tsurkov as a journalist and human rights advocate gathering field material for a PhD at Princeton. Yet too many details jar with that portrait. Her free movement in Syria and Iraq, her access to Baghdad's Shiite quarters, her meetings with people who rarely tolerate outsiders. Israeli commentator Richard Silverstein offers a third possibility in Tikkun Olam. Tsurkov may not be a Mossad officer, but rather a Mossad asset. There are many cases in which Israeli intelligence has exploited journalists and academics who have reported in countries where it has no official presence. They are not employed by Mossad as agents, but they serve as intelligence assets. Certainly the Mossad would be extremely interested in her research in Syria and Iraq. Where does scholarly curiosity end and clandestine work begin? The answer still drifts in the same shadows that swallowed Elizabeth herself, leaving behind only a trail of mutually exclusive versions. January 2025. The Iraqi foreign minister makes a rare statement. Yes, Elizabeth Tsurkov is alive. We are working on securing her release. It is the first official confirmation after many months of silence. But where is she now? The answer remains unknown. Some sources claim that Elizabeth is no longer in Iraq. It is possible she was transferred to Iran, a country closely tied to Kataib Hezbollah, the group accused of her abduction. If that is true, her situation becomes even more dangerous. Iran is a country that, according to former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad himself, has long been a battlefield in a silent war. In 2024, he admitted that Israeli intelligence had deeply infiltrated Iran's security structures. The head of the unit, tasked with fighting Mossad, turned out to be an Israeli agent. Alongside him, at least 20 more undercover operatives had been embedded. This makes Tsurkov's fate even more uncertain. She has become part of a much bigger game, where her life is just one piece on a geopolitical chessboard. Her release depends not only on her family's efforts, but on secret negotiations, diplomatic intrigue, and the clashing interests of world powers. For now, there is only waiting. The story of Elizabeth Tsurkov is not just a tale of abduction. It is a reflection of the era we live in, where activism is easily mistaken for espionage, where a journalist with a camera might be a spy, where truth and deception blur into one gray zone, where there are no heroes, only interests, and where one young woman, fluent in Arabic, found herself at the very heart of a geopolitical storm. And now a question for you viewers. Who do you think Elizabeth Tsurkov really is? A human rights defender, a scholar, or perhaps an intelligence agent? And most importantly, will she ever make it home? Or will her story end far from her loved ones, buried in secret deals and political games? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you found this video engaging, please support the channel by liking and subscribing. Thank you for watching.